5.5 years ago, the second week of rabbinical school, I was sitting in my first-year Talmud class with Rabbi David Hoffman. Rabbi Hoffman entered the room, and immediately the three of us who were in that room began to have a collective panic attack. Will we ever learn how to study Talmud? We can't even get through 3 words. How will we even get through the next 6 years, we asked. What is Rashi's script? It was clear we were eager to become rabbis, and yet we were struggling with, and maybe even doubting, that journey that lay ahead. In response to our cries, Rabbi Hoffman drew a mountain on the chalkboard. And at the bottom of that mountain, he drew a large X. And he said, "You guys are here at that X. You want to be here at the top. My advice," he said, "don't look up." Don't look up, maybe the most important Torah we were taught in those first few weeks of school. Don't look up taught us to really be present in that moment, to work on the self in times of doubt, to live in that moment of the X. What we were asking at the beginning of that class was the question, how will we ever get out of here? And we imagined that same question being asked by Joseph this week in Parshat Vayeshev. We learn of the intense jealousy Joseph's brothers had, that Joseph was the favored son. Joseph boasted himself to his brothers that he would one day rule over his family. And in response, the brothers attack him. Vayikachuhu, vayashlichu oto habora, v'habor reik ein bo mayim. They took him and they threw him into the pit. The bore, the pit, was empty. There was no water in it. Our Torah goes into great detail surrounding the actions of the brothers before, during, and after Joseph was thrown into the pit. Yet we are left wondering as the readers, what is happening to Joseph inside that pit? What is he doing in the emptiness of that bore? Our first impression of the story, and indeed our very first instinct, might jump to imagining Joseph asking that question, how do I get out of here? And while we know nothing about Joseph's experience inside the pit from this verse, we do learn in next week's Parsha Miketz that Joseph's brothers admit that they are being punished because, quote, "We, the brothers, looked on at Joseph's anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us." The Torah tells us that Joseph was crying out to his brothers from the depths of the pit. He was yelling, "Get me out of here." He was looking up and looking for a way out. Yet it must have become very clear to Joseph that this method, this desire to get out, it just wouldn't work. It must have become very clear to Joseph that no one could hear him from the depths of that pit, or at least that no one was truly listening. After crying out and asking his brothers to save him from the pit, we imagine Joseph sitting there and just looking around, seeing where he is. Aviva Zornberg writes that the bore, the pit, is a space where normal logic and law don't function. It's an absurd, hollow space in which one can cry out and not be heard, in which one feels cut off from past and from future. This initial instinct of calling out and asking to be set free just doesn't always work. And it's at this moment when the question Joseph asks changes from how do I get out of here to how do I dwell in here? Unlike how do I get out of here, which is an address towards someone else, the question how do I dwell in here focuses on the self. It asks how to be in the moment, how to live in the depths of a dark and a very difficult place. It takes a situation that is shaped and driven from the outward and forces a deep and perhaps dark and difficult look inward. How do I dwell in here? What inner strength, what bastion of resolve do I have stored up in my soul for this very moment? How do I dwell in here? How might this pit provide a place for learning, for growth, for improvement? How do I dwell in here? How, in a place that is otherwise empty, do I love and appreciate my own fullness? Pits can be an opportunity for growth and for self-reflection, yet admittedly and importantly, This growth, this development, this realization happens mainly in retrospect. Looking back, Joseph can see the pit experience perhaps as being a positive, albeit difficult one. Yet during that pit experience, while in the depth of that hole, it may have been, and it often is, much more difficult to bask the darkness in such positive light. In fact, our text alludes to this challenging moment of being the pit itself. It describes the boy as being unfilled, v'habor reik, ein bo mayim. The pit was empty, it had no water. Rabbi Acha, quoted in Bereshit Rabbah, teaches that ein bo mayim is not only literal, it's deeply, deeply spiritual as well. He expounds on this phrase and teaches, ein bo mayim, ein bo divrei Torah, shenim shalu l'mayim. There were in it no Torah teachings. Torah, God, are nowhere to be found in these hollow and dark spaces. While in the pit, Joseph feels a deep betrayal of family and a loss of meaning. He doubts his existence, he doubts himself, and he sinks deeper and deeper and feels cut off from that outside world. What if Torah just can't be experienced during such times? What if turning to God just won't always work? Are there any pit experiences in our lives where there just can't be any Torah? Whether personal suffering and tragedy, or experiencing feelings of loss, feelings of doubt and betrayal by looking at how our own society has sunken deeper and deeper into its own hollow pit, we find ourselves many times in our lives at the bottom. And while we may yearn to be optimistic, while we may want to turn to God, and while we as students and teachers of our holy tradition may yearn to bring Torah into these pits, we sometimes simply cannot. And that has to be okay. That is what living at the X may mean. Sometimes the path to Torah includes experiences where we feel like there just is no Torah to be found. And while this is hard to admit, this notion appears in our rabbinic literature as well. Toward the beginning of Masechet Brachot in the Talmud, we learn that some of our earlier sages held a positive notion of dealing with their dark pits. They said the righteous receive sufferings from God with joy, that we, every one of us, should embrace those moments of pain, of affliction, since it comes directly from God. Yet a few lines later on that same page in the Talmud, we read about 3 cases where Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Eliezer each in turn fall ill. And when asked the question, is your suffering welcome to you? Each sage responds in the same manner. Neither my suffering is welcomed, nor its rewards. These rabbis do not try to find meaning or explain their moments of being in their pit. They reject that theology of suffering bringing reward or positivity. They do not simply attach themselves to God through prayer to be healed. They don't even mention God at all. Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Eliezer are all in a place where ein bo divrei Torah, no Torah can be found. They are sitting in their pain. They're not searching for a way out. They're living in the X. Is there, though, any model at all in our parsha for those moments? For those experiences when our pits are truly just dry, where we find ourselves parched without the mayim of Torah or of inner resolve? At the end of our parsha, chapters after being thrown into his initial pit, Joseph finds himself in yet another bore. Joseph is thrown into prison in Egypt. And while in prison, Joseph says, I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, but I have done nothing here that they should have put me in the bore. Ki samu oti babor. Bore, the same word used earlier in our parsha when Joseph was thrown into that first pit, is translated here as dungeon. But Joseph sees his imprisonment as yet another pit, cut off from the outside world, his cries, his pleas for help unable to be heard. And yet, there's something different about this second bore experience. Joseph isn't, in fact, totally alone. Rabbi Yabin in Bereshit Rabbah reads the end of this verse differently. Instead of reading the text as ki samu oti babor, for they put me in the bore, he tells us that Joseph actually says ki samu iti babor, for they put with me in the bore, meaning the divine presence accompanied Joseph into this second pit. Joseph may have been helpless, and Joseph may have been hopeless, but Joseph was not alone in this second pit. God might not have been there to rescue Joseph. God might not have been there to pull him out of this pit, but God's presence was able to accompany Joseph through the depths of his valleys, not at all to fill the pit with water, but to sit in its emptiness together. Which opens us up to the question today: when we are in our pits, our bores, who or what can we bring with us? Who or what can BET be with me, be with each and every one of us in the valleys of our lives that feel so scary and so empty? For some of us, we search for God in those places. We bring that sense of divine inspiration, Itanu, with us. But for others, we seek to bring our loved ones with us as support. For some, we may bring with us a desire for new beginnings and hope for a better and more sustainable future, while for others, we seek to bring with us the invitation to just let out our cries and let out our sorrows and just sit in that darkness. Not at all as a means to escape or get out, but as a means towards living in and through that moment, living in that moment as our fullest possible selves. Today I stand here almost at the top of my rabbinical school mountain, 6 years after seeing myself at the bottom, and I know that, like Joseph, I will be thrown into the pits of the human experience many more times in my career and my life. Indeed, in retrospect, my moment of panic during that first year of rabbinical school wasn't the deepest, darkest pit that I or many of us in this room could imagine, or have or will experience. But the resilience we build and hone during our life's smaller pits is the same resilience, the same set of skills that we will draw on during the bigger and badder moments. So as we look to those pits, those new X's at the base of new mountains, I invite us to, like Joseph, open ourselves up to being transformed by our bores, to approach the journeys as opportunities for self-reflection and improvement, or for the pits where no such mayim, no such water, no such Torah can be found, to really seek out and welcome in the presences that will accompany and support us. Because we will all face our own bores. And so may we each bring with us the courage to face such difficulties with strength and with determination, to really and truthfully dwell in each difficult moment and bring with us the things that we need to transform ourselves and our future. Kaddish Rabbanan. Yikara v'yikara shemei rabbah, v'yamad yivrak kirtei v'yamlik malchutei b'chayechon uv'yamechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen, yehei shmei rabbah, Yeheshmei Rabban v'rach le'olam omei omaya, yiparach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitshemam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal, shemei d'kedusha b'richu, le'elam mikol berchata v'shirata, tish b'chata v'nechamata, da'miram b'yama v'imru amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmideon v'al kol Talmidei Talmideon v'al kol man de'oskim be'oraita di v'atra hadein v'di v'chol atar v'atar, yehei lehon ulchon shlama rabachina v'chista v'rachamim v'chai narichin umzunari v'cha, u'forkana min kodam avuhon di v'shmaya v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imrumav hu b'rachamav yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and please join us for some coffee and cookies over there. Thanks.